This is Charlene Burke with Grow Because You Know. That's www.growbecauseyouknow.com. Welcome to Morning Mindset Cafe, where we read a few pages of Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich and then discuss what we've read. Today we'll be reading pages 193 to 197 that can be summarized as the desire to change. Let's get started, shall we? When employing salesmen, the more capable sales manager looks for the quality of personal magnetism as the first requirement of a salesman. People who lack sex energy will never become enthusiastic nor inspire others with enthusiasm. And enthusiasm is one of the most important requisites in salesmanship, no matter what one is selling. The public speaker, orator, preacher, lawyer, or salesman who is lacking in sex energy is a flop as far as being able to influence others is concerned. Couple with this the fact that most people can be influenced only through an appeal to their emotions, and you will understand the importance of sex energy as a part of the salesman's native ability. Master salesmen attain the status of mastery in selling because they either consciously or unconsciously transmute the energy of sex into sales enthusiasm. In this statement may be found a very practical suggestion as to the actual meaning of sex transmutation. The salesman who knows how to take his mind off the subject of sex and direct it in sales effort with as much enthusiasm and determination as he would apply to its original purpose has acquired the art of sex transmutation, whether he knows it or not. The majority of salesmen who transmute their sex energy do so without being in the least aware of what they're doing or how they're doing it. Transmutation of sex energy calls for more willpower than the average person cares to use for this purpose. Those who find it difficult to summon willpower sufficient for transmutation may gradually acquire this ability. Though this requires willpower, the reward of the practice is more than worth the effort. The entire subject of sex is one with which the majority of people appear to be unpardonably ignorant. The urge of sex has been grossly misunderstood, slandered, and burlesqued by the ignorant and the evil-minded for so long that the very word sex is seldom used in polite society. Men and women who are known to be blessed, yes, blessed, with highly sexed natures are usually looked upon as being people who will bear watching. Instead of being called blessed, they are usually called cursed. Millions of people, even in this age of enlightenment, have inferiority complexes which they developed because of this false belief that a highly sexed nature is a curse. These statements of the virtue of sex energy should not be construed as justification for the libertine. The emotion of sex is a virtue only when used intelligently and with discrimination. It may be misused, and often is, to such an extent that it debases instead of enriches both body and mind. The better use of this power is the burden of this chapter. It seemed quite significant to the author when he made the discovery that practically every great leader whom he had the privilege of analyzing was a man whose achievements were largely inspired by a woman. In many instances, the woman in the case was a modest, self-denying wife of whom the public had heard but little or nothing. In a few instances, the source of inspiration has been traced to the other woman. Perhaps such cases may not be entirely unknown to you. Intemperance in sex habits is just as detrimental as intemperance in habits of drinking and eating. In this age in which we live, an age which began with the World War, intemperance in habits of sex is common. This orgy of indulgence may account for the shortage of great leaders. No man can avail himself of the forces of his creative imagination while dissipating them. Man is the only creature on earth which violates nature's purpose in this connection. Every other animal indulges its sex nature in moderation and with purpose which harmonizes with the laws of nature. Every other animal responds to the call of sex only in season. Man's inclination is to declare open season. Every intelligent person knows that stimulation and excess through alcoholic drink and narcotics is a form of intemperance which destroys the vital organs of the body, including the brain. Not every person knows, however, that overindulgence in sex expression may become a habit as destructive and as detrimental to creative effort as narcotics or liquor. A sex-mad man is not essentially different than a dope-mad man. Both have lost control over their faculties of reason and willpower. Sexual overindulgence may not only destroy reason and willpower, but may also lead to either temporary or permanent insanity. Many cases of hypochondria, imaginary illness, grow out of habits developed in ignorance of the true function of sex. From these brief references to the subject, it may be readily seen that ignorance on the subject of sex transmutation forces stupendous penalties upon the ignorant on the one hand, and withholds from them equally stupendous benefits on the other. Widespread ignorance on the subject of sex is due to the fact that the subject has been surrounded with mystery and beclouded by dark silence. The conspiracy of mystery and silence has had the same effect upon the minds of young people that the psychology of prohibition had. The result has been increased curiosity and desire to acquire more knowledge on this verboten subject, and to the shame of all lawmakers and most physicians, by training best qualified to educate youth on that subject, information has not been easily available. Seldom does an individual enter upon highly creative effort in any field of endeavor before the age of 40. The average man reaches the period of his greatest capacity to create between 40 and 60. These statements are based upon analysis of thousands of men and women who have been carefully observed. They should be encouraging to those who fail to arrive before the age of 40, and to those who become frightened at the approach of old age around the 40-year mark. The years between 40 and 50 are, as a rule, the most fruitful. Men should approach this age not with fear and trembling, but with hope and eager anticipation. If you want evidence that most men do not begin to do their best work before the age of 40, study the records of the most successful men known to the American people, and you will find it. Henry Ford did not hit his pace of achievement until he had passed the age of 40. Andrew Carnegie was well past 40 before he began to reap the reward of his efforts. James J. Hill was still running a telegraph key at the age of 40. His stupendous achievements took place after that age. Biographies of American industrialists and financiers are filled with evidence that the period from 40 to 60 is the most productive age of man. Between the ages of 30 and 40, man begins to learn, if he ever learns, the art of sex transmutation. This discovery is generally accidental, and more often than otherwise, the man who makes it is totally unconscious of his discovery. He may observe that his powers of achievement have increased around the age of 35 to 40, but in most cases, he's not familiar with the cause of this change, that nature begins to harmonize the emotions of love and sex in the individual between the ages of 30 and 40, so that he may draw upon these great forces and apply them jointly as stimuli to action. Sex alone is a mighty urge to action, but its forces are like a cyclone. They are often uncontrollable. When the emotion of love begins to mix itself with the emotion of sex, the result is calmness of purpose, poise, accuracy of judgment, and balance. What person who has attained to the age of 40 is so unfortunate as to be unable to analyze these statements and to corroborate them by his own experience? When driven by his desire to please a woman, based solely upon the emotion of sex, a man may be, and usually is, capable of great achievement, but his actions may be disorganized, distorted, totally destructive. When driven by his desire to please a woman, based upon the motive of sex alone, a man may steal, cheat, even commit murder. But when the emotion of love is mixed with the emotion of sex, that same man will guide his actions with more sanity, balance, and reason. Criminologists have discovered that the most hardened criminals can be reformed through the influence of a woman's love. There is no record of a criminal having been reformed solely through a sex influence. These facts are well known, but their cause is not. Reformation comes, if at all, through the heart, or the emotional side of man, not through his head or reasoning side. Reformation means a change of heart. It does not mean a change of head. A man may, because of reason, make certain changes in his personal conduct to avoid the consequences of undesirable effects. But genuine reformation comes only through a change of heart, through a desire to change. Love, romance, and sex are all emotions capable of driving men to heights of superachievement. Love is the emotion which serves as a safety valve and ensures balance, poise, and constructive effort. When combined, these three emotions may lift one to an altitude of a genius. There are genii, however, who know but little of the emotion of love. Most of them may be found engaged in some form of action which is destructive, or at least not based upon justice and fairness toward others. If good taste would permit, a dozen genii could be named in the field of industry and finance who ride ruthlessly over the rights of their fellow men. They seem totally lacking in conscience. The reader can easily supply his own list of such men. I'm going to stop there because I think that is excellent fodder for discussion. So welcome, Mike. Good to see you here. Ron, glad to see you here. Thanks for joining us. Names that I can't pronounce. Eric Rashi, good to see you as always. Stan Bush, pleasure to see you again. Patrick, nice to see you here. So, and Mike, you're back from your 24-hour blackout. Yes, you are. And Ian, have you noticed the sun has risen? The light is now shining. Didn't take long, did it? So yeah, I can't help that, buddy. It's nighttime at your end. So again, that desire to change I think is, well, I know that's part of what I got out of this was that the explanation, and part of which we covered yesterday, which I was so grateful for the men who were so kind as to explain as best they could their own experience of approaching 40 and being different, and having a partner to temper, that provides the inspiration, that provides the motivation, if you will. But also what I'm reading here, and again, this is from the woman's point of view, when a man has a woman and love is put into the mix, from a woman's point of view, I can tell you that is when we see a real man at work. That's when you blossom. You become a real man, quite capable of great things. I've seen it. I've seen it in my own husband. I've seen it in others. As a woman, taking what I'm seeing here is that desire to change and that willpower to be focused enough to take that level of energy and learn how to bring it in so that I can get that creative imagination going. Welcome, Matt. Good to see you, my dear.
Good to see you too. Good morning.
How are you?
I'm very well. Let me see. What hit me here was I'm doing some reading on a book by Simon Sinek that's talking about the 4 brain chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little saying you can do like EDSO or you can do DOSE. It's endorphins. I don't know if I talked about this last time I was on. Endorphins. Dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin. And the part where he was talking about not being able to control that energy and only staying on that level of physicality and not like rising to a higher level with love.
Detrimental. Yes.
So it's sort of like it's a very, very high dopamine cycle. It's a constant, immediate reward because it's all based off the physical level. And if there's no oxytocin, which is that long-term created brain chemical of trust and connectedness, and that's that love chemical, I think that's definitely what he's getting at with being able to voluntarily create the emotion of love in a relationship instead of and balance out those chemicals, more oxytocin, serotonin, less dopamine and endorphins, which are very immediate and I guess pleasure driven. Right.
So the combination is outstanding because when you bring in that chemical, what he's calling love here, mixed with the sex emotion, the combination is what makes it so powerful.
Absolutely.
That's where we need the partner involved. That's where the opposite sex comes into play, right?
So, and it's always biological to feel that natural inclination toward the opposite energy polarity because that's just we're biological creatures. That's sort of the way.
Well, yeah, that's just part of the human experience. So,
yeah.
Are you fiddling with something because it's coming through on the microphone?
It's sitting on the glass table instead of the. There we go.
Okay, thank you. So what this is telling me is that, and I'll put up here first off for those who weren't a part of yesterday's discussion, I'm fully aware and fully acknowledge that men are different than women. And what Napoleon Hill is describing is an experience and a perspective I don't have. I get that. So I'm going to talk to you from the female side because we don't have that. We're not driven by that level of energy that men are. Chemically, we're just not.
Yeah.
We're driven by other things. Okay. And it is related to men, and the same things apply hormonally and chemically and what have you. It's just different. It's a different energy than what's being described here, but it's still an energy that I'm recognizing when I'm able to take my mind off of the needs for fulfillment, the needs for love, the need for assurance, the need for protection, security, all the things that come into play as a female being attracted to a male, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the female side. When I can take my mind off of that and instead focus on the task at hand, or on the goal that I have set, or on putting myself in a place where I can get that moment of brilliance, is when it can happen. And I believe that it begins with the desire to change. It begins with the desire to not be so, we can put it as simply on the female side as boy crazy. You know, that's how you can look at it, as girls get just nuts. They go boy crazy, and that's what we call it. And regardless of the age, you can recognize it, as we can recognize it in men, correct?
Cray.
So is that what that means? I don't know. What do I know?
I don't know.
Okay. But that's what it is. And so but it's still an energy.
Yeah.
And
the energy's still there.
It's that energy that I'm identifying that, and I can see in my past where it really came into play, where I had my moments of brilliance, or being able to solve a problem, or moving forward with something that seemed to be so insurmountable, was being able to take my mind off of, we'll call it the boy crazy, and instead direct my mind elsewhere. Now, sustainability comes into play, I think, when Napoleon Hill is talking at the age of 40 for men. I'm not sure what the age is for women, but for men, based on this reading, he's saying the age of 40, and it's because that energy, that intense drive, is now mixed with another emotion, which you were bringing in as that chemical, Matt. The same thing applies to women, in that when another chemical is added, when that love is found, that energy now becomes more, and it's different, and it becomes, it can be more powerful than anything else. For God's sakes, trust me, very few mothers wouldn't jump in front of a train to save their child.
Yeah, it definitely.
So something changes there, and whatever age that happens, we can still take that energy and focus it on something else, or use it now that it's more than just single energy. Now we've got the two, the love combined with the sex. Now we can really now we're conscious of that energy and really focus it. What do you think?
I do think it has to do with awareness. Maybe it just takes time for people to develop that awareness. I've heard about, like, when you're young, you don't really have a good sense of reality, and maybe that energy is still hard to control, and you're still kind of finding out how to channel that. And then when you're conscious enough and you're able to, I like to say, when you go through enough experience and you sort of get hit by reality a few times, your ego tends to die off. You start to break the shell of the ego, and that awareness starts to come in, and you start to think at a higher level of frequency. You think, like, you're more conscious of what's real and what's not. And I think that does bring in more of a long-term focus in terms of goals and initiative. But
so let me throw out here, though, what I found interesting, what struck me as you were saying this, was environment.
Yeah.
What are we being told by society and being inundated with the messages that are being sent to us on a regular basis. And what I found interesting was Napoleon Hill was talking about basically the debauchery of the times. We're talking into the 30s and 40s, right? We came out of World War I, getting ready to go into World War II, and you got the roaring 20s. People went just bonkers. I mean, and essentially they went sex crazy.
And then the nature rebalanced it.
Well, yeah, that's kind of, but look what's happening in our society today. That's why I wanted to put this on the focus of that desire to change, that awareness that we can move from what he's calling that lower plane, which is going just by animal instinct. Even if society is saying that's okay and that's what you should do, for me to be better, I can be. And I can be by having that self-discipline and control, but by channeling that energy, recognizing.
Yeah, it is voluntary. And I just went quick. I just scrolled down quick, and there's
I know there's more.
There's no other road to genius than through voluntary self-effort. So I think it's making it conscious. You have to increase your level of awareness and operate at what I've read about called a higher state of consciousness. That's where your ability to respond to life's challenges comes from. And I do think that if we do not adjust consciously and voluntarily with our desire, and we continue down the path of the more reactive desire, like the drive for pleasure or whatever, then eventually nature will adjust it for us. I mean, if you don't change early on, you're going to face the change later on. Whether you recognize the change is happening or you wait until you hit the wall and you have to change, you're going to have to adapt at some point. So
it's an excellent way to put it.
If you would change early, you're not going to suffer as much as if you were to wait until that moment when you have to change suddenly. So maybe that voluntary desire part that's part of it, is recognizing with that awareness that you can change earlier. I do think it happens earlier for women. I mean, that's just my perspective. Than it does for men, because women mature.
Yeah. It does, but it's different still. It's different still. It's not that it's better or worse.
Yeah, it's just different.
It is different because the energy is still there, and it can be just as intense. It's just different. It's not the drive that, again, we're going to go back to the hormones and the chemicals. I mean, women literally don't have the testosterone. That's the driver, right? Yeah. So that's, and with the estrogen, and then you bring in the other chemicals you're saying that occur as emotions come into play. We're just made up different. But it's still an intense energy that has to be recognized and put in control. Otherwise, here's an example that was just brought to mind. One example of it being detrimental to a woman would be excessively needy.
Yeah.
All right, most of you men,
helicopter.
Oh, for God's sakes, here I sit with all these wonderful men. All right, here we go. All right, folks. So it's a good thing I like you guys. So what I'm thinking is that how many of you, just think about this for a second, and I may be way off track, but I'm going to rely on you to put me back on if I am. How many of you have had the experience of taking a gal out and just so annoying because she's clingy and can't do anything without making sure checking in with you?
Put a 1 in the chat.
Right. Put a 1 in the chat. How many? 1 in the chat. That's a good one, Matt. 1 in the chat. And that just was like this suffocating, this person, you thought it was going to be great to have her on your arm, but all of a sudden she's this octopus because she can't seem to do anything without you, right? You are the center of her universe, and it feels great initially because it's almost like adoration, but it doesn't take long before it's like, good Lord, could you
and that's an extreme. That's an extreme. And that's maybe the other thing I read about in college is in perspectives. There's sort of more of an inclination for women, I think, towards an ethics of care and how that can get too extreme, maybe with the neediness. And with men, it's an ethics of justice, and it can get more toward setting limitations. What was really interesting, though, in that study by Carol, I can't remember who it was, but the study looked at how men, in terms of responsibility, when it comes to thinking about responsibility, they tend to put limits and labels on their terms of responsibility, like, I need to be limited here, I can't go past this point. Women, on the other hand, tend to saw responsibility in terms of, I have more possibility and responsibility. They didn't put limits on things. They extended very, very widely, very far, and then they said, at what point in the ethics of care should I, when I feel right, should I expand that ethics of care? So men saw it as a responsibility. Women saw it as a sort of a thing they had to do. They didn't put limits on themselves. They saw it as, I'm already connected to this. How much can I do for others? So that's
that's another way to put it.
Yeah.
And that's that energy I'm talking about from the female side. That the best I can do to equate to what I'm reading that the men have, and it's detrimental when it's not tempered.
Yeah.
On either side, isn't it?
Exactly.
And when we as women, do I have? Okay, I've got a fellow woman in here. Thank you. I knew I'd find you up here. Thank goodness. There's another me up here somewhere. Hi, Michelle. Good to have you here. Thank you. No, I'm not going to call you in. Only if you want to come into the room. But it's still, if my experience when working with women who are excessively needy, we're talking excessive, it is an extreme, when they have come from battered relationships, they've come from domestic upheaval, not necessarily just upheaval, a lot of bad things by their own doing, but also by others to them. And they're in the process of changing their lives. What I have seen is that they're quite capable of changing their lives as long as they're shown that if you have enough desire to change, you can. And this is how you can do it. Some things that you can employ, tactics and techniques and what have you, that and really, I guess what I'm talking about when I'm thinking about those times I've worked with some of these women is it's a channeling of that energy that they have, because they still have the need to be taken care of. They still have the need to be secure. They still have the need to have the man right next to them, or they're not complete, right?
That's what keeps them in the relationship sometimes too.
Yes, and that's what does. But I'm saying
it's hard to leave.
Have that.
Yeah.
But so now they've left, though. They've left. So they still have that. This is my halogen light bulb moment. They still have that energy. And it's that energy that led them to what ended up being a not so good relationship to begin with. But that's what led them there. Still have that.
Yeah.
So it's not that I was trying to get them to change the energy. I was trying to get them to, without verbalizing like I am right now, I'm trying to get them to recognize that that's who they are and what they have, but they don't have to be acting the way they are. They can channel it differently. And so a lot of the channeling that I did, I don't even like the word channeling, but a lot of the guidance that I gave was how to refocus your attention and show them that they can get that same feeling of fulfillment and being needed, which is really important, and that care that they just feel compelled to give, and they can do it in other ways. And then what ends up happening by showing them on the outside that there's ways you can do this, because it's different, the change that happens to them is it becomes internal. But it has to come from, they have to be physically doing things outside for it to be internalized. So that's one female's point of view. Well, it is a process, Michelle. It is. But again, what the whole point of the reading was that level of energy that must be tempered. And so women have it. It's just different. It's an energy that's different than what we read. That was a description of the man's energy. And I got to tell you, based on what he's describing, it's obvious that the men who, we all know the saying, behind every great man is a great woman. And that's why it now makes sense. When outlined the way he put it, it makes sense.
Yeah, I do think in those situations, it's just about making the person, it's sort of making unconscious things that they're not aware of, probably how they're channeling that energy, and getting them to be aware of how they're channeling it. I mean, in those situations, it might be a lot of, there's no oxytocin chemical developing, there's no serotonin, it's all dopamine, that neediness, because it's all immediate. It's not long term. I have to hop out, but
okay, dear. Thank you for stopping in.
I'm opening the seat for somebody else. Hop on in. Okay.
Always good to see you, Matt. Thank you. So can you imagine coming to these conclusions after 500 specific successful people that he interviewed and watched, and thousands of men and women that he paid attention to over 25 years, one of the conclusions he came to when it came to that sex energy was it was so obvious to him. And that's 1937 when this book was published. And here we sit in 2015, and it's so obvious to me. How many men can we point out that are driven to doing great things that are associated with a woman? And I think it was said yesterday that great civilizations have been built and have fallen over a woman. So it's channeling that energy. And how many of us are really self-aware enough? I'm not. To recognize when that's happening, when we are refocusing our attention. Just thoughts. And I think desire to change is the beginning. And we can, and I think what I'm trying to say with that, is that I still have the drive. You can still have the drive. You're just changing where it's directed to. So instead of being completely focused on any activity that's detrimental to health and to the well-being of yourself and others, directing that energy that you're in, that drive towards that activity, into something else. I noticed that somebody earlier commented another example is being played out every fall weekend in the form of football players. Yes. Sports is an excellent microcosm of channeling that level of energy and drive in men into something productive and beneficial. So there it is. Who wants to join me in the discussion? I know what it is. You think you're going to be on camera. I can say that, and you also know I will continue to talk because I have to. Michelle, self-esteem is a portion of what I was talking about, but it again was related. It was directly related to what the reading was, which is the direction of sex energy in men. What made men great leaders? And how can we tap into that and direct that energy so that we have those moments of genius, so that we can raise ourselves above what's called the normal plane or the low plane. And so the last paragraph I read said, love, romance, and sex are all emotions capable of driving men to heights of super achievement. And when you combine all three, it can do that for women. So I can speak to that. When combined, these three emotions may lift one to an altitude of a genius. Now, of course, it's recognized that there are those that do have that level of genius, that don't have those emotions driving them. Therefore, they're evil, basically, is what they're being described as. They're detrimental to themselves and to other people. And what Napoleon Hill is telling us is that those who achieve greatness with these three emotions as part of the drive to achieve are doing so to the betterment of themselves and to others, which is why I really like this book. It's all about being a better me. And by being a better me, I can raise myself and focus my attentions, talents, and skills, add to them, focus that energy on having a better business, which in turn is of service to others. Hi, Vicki. So glad you're here. Good to see you. Belinda, welcome. Good to see you. Eric, glad to see you here. So desire to change. Can that be the start of true and genuine reformation? I think it can. The other thing that it was read here was that reformation comes, if it does at all, through the heart, not the mind. So we have the feeling and the need for something different to be better, which of course to me is the desire. I have a desire to change. Yeah, interesting point, Mike, saying at 40 hits at around the 20-year mark of what you've been doing for business. So maybe now you're in a position to take that business further, to be greater than who you are right now. So let's get away from the age. Let's talk about combination of heart and head, right? It's the heart drives, the emotions drive everything. And we're calling sex an emotion here. So we have that energy, which is intense and much more intense than most of the other emotions, except fear, I think. I think fear equates. But how sustainable is fear, right? How sustainable is badly directed or negatively directed energies? Not very. And that's what I like that he's saying is when we mix it with something else, when we mix it with love and romance, the other emotions, we're more on a level of sanity, balance, and reason. We still have a reason to be doing things, but again, it's not to the detriment of ourselves or others. Awful quiet here. And here I was going to leave the room open for 30 minutes afterwards. I don't know that I'm going to need to. Let's see, what else did he bring in here? That magnetism, right in the beginning of the reading, is people who lack that energy. They're flops. They don't have that enthusiasm, which I found interesting as another way to describe that level of energy. And that's why there are successful salespeople, is that magnetism, that which you're attracted to. Found that interesting. There he is. Good morning, Ron. Good to see you.
Good
Welcome.
morning, Charlene. Yeah, I've just been sitting here. It's a little bit easier for me to talk about the thought process versus the emotional side to things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to make sure that I could contribute before actually coming on. But what I was thinking about was to me, it's almost like, a rocket ship when you're before it blasts off, and the emotions and the desire and all that. It's like the fuel that it takes to launch the rocket. Okay. But once that rocket is launched and it gets into out into the world,
right.
Then you don't need as much fuel. Then it's more about the tactics and looking at, they're looking at, the measurements and the lead measure.
Now it's in the maintenance mode.
Yes. So
okay.
I'm almost kind of seeing that as like, that's what this is like, because you don't need, because if we just did everything based on emotion, we'd really be screwed. And there's a lot of people that do that. They base all their decisions on emotion and about those desires, and it does almost become almost elementary, in the way that we think, and that gets us in trouble. So I think we definitely have to have that desire and or we're not going to get anything accomplished. But once you have that established, then I think you need to go back into the thinking mode and the action mode. It's just kind of another
okay. Good thoughts.
Yeah.
Good thoughts. So what I was imagining is that, and I'm getting feedback because you don't have your earbuds in, right?
Right. And okay. I'm at home today, so.
Okay. So what I'm imagining is that that fuel that you're talking about is actually that pent up energy. It's going to have to go someplace. And you're talking about this rocket that has now loaded up with fuel and it hasn't been lit yet, but it's still potential energy. The potential is there to be huge, to be able to move mountains if need be, right? And so there you are as a person with this pent up level of fuel and energy. And so you select the focus. That's where the mind comes in. You select the focus of that energy. What am I going to put my mind onto? And what am I going to accomplish today? Or what am I going to go after? Or what I'm going to do? And that becomes the flame that torches, if you will, that fuel. So now the energy goes and there's that full force. You've got the enthusiasm. You've got that magnetism that's attractive to other people. You've got the desire to keep moving forward because now you have a focus for it. And then it dissipates a bit, but it's still there. So instead of just saying, well, I'm not as enthusiastic as I used to be, we go into maintenance mode, which is where we're still focused on attaining something, moving towards something better, improving, trying to get that creative genius, creative imagination into play. And because we're conscious of it, keep moving forward. We still are able to sustain because it's not that intense as it was before. Did I get close?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I really do. I think so. I'm finishing up a book, and I think it was mentioned in one of the other blabs, and I don't remember if it was on this blab or another one that I mentioned, because one of the chapters in my book it says, "What's emotion have to do with it?" And so and I think emotions are very important, and I think having that desire is very important, but we just cannot put the focus on that. That cannot be.
And that's what Napoleon Hill's saying. That's what's detrimental when it's solely, that's the extreme.
Yeah.
That's the sole reason for my being is everything I'm feeling. And in this case, that sex energy. In the man, it's going after the girls, constant. And the girls, it's boy crazy. The end result's a little different, but there's a purpose, right? And it's all on that what he's calling that lower plane, even lower, because now it's the base instincts, right, rather than the rest of us, which is the spirit and the mind and the body. And when any one of those gets out of whack and to an extreme, it's detrimental. And what you're saying is, let's bring some of that mind into play, which is what he's saying. You got the desire to change, but think it first. I want to be different. I want something different than what I'm doing now, or I'm seeing out here that this isn't the way I want to be. I want to achieve great things. How am I going to do that? How did they do it? And they don't talk, they being my mentors, men and women, they don't talk about, well, I was a highly sexed, highly charged, that's not how they talk. What they say is that, I was so energized, so passionate about what I was doing that I was able to keep my focus on it. Or even when the passion for what I am doing or going towards wanes, I still have these other things that are in maintenance mode, is equating to what we're talking about. That would be the maintenance mode. I still have these other things going. I don't have to feel that intense passion and enthusiasm all the time.
Right.
And so what happens, and what I've noticed with me, what happens when I'm talking about this is that over the years in business, that passion reignites. I'm still focused on the same thing. The passion reignites and more enthusiasm comes into play. But even that level of intensity isn't sustainable So I have the other things that balance me and keep me relatively balanced, more complete human. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, one of the things is when we get so caught up in the emotions of what it is that we do, it ends up, if that's where we put our focus and that's what everything is surrounded around, what ends up happening is because all the things that Napoleon Hill's talking about are good things.
Yep.
All those emotions are really good emotions. But if we just and you mentioned it earlier, you were talking about, like women that get in and they're in bad relationships where they're being abused, and if they get out of that relationship, they get into another relationship quite the same because they're not changing.
Right.
They're just, and it's the same way with men too. They have. I'm not blaming that all on women.
Oh no,
men
of course
have that
not. I know you're not. I know.
So
we're equal opportunity abusers.
Yeah. But when those things happen, if we stick to the emotional part to it, it can be so detrimental to the point of even death.
Yes.
I mean, people, because that's why they say, I did something in the heat of passion, and I mean, and you mentioned it again earlier, how many nations have risen and fallen because of women, but it was because of that, putting that focus so much on that desire and putting your thoughts too much on that emotional part.
I agree. The other thing that he said in here, which I found interesting, and it dawned on me as you said, the rise and fall of nations and what have you, is at the very beginning when he says, hold on, because I thought about the kind of leadership we have today. Because those without the sex energy, those who, where are our leaders, right? Where is it? Oh, people who lack sex energy will never become enthusiastic, nor will they inspire others with enthusiasm. That's one of them. But again, it's he said it directly to leadership, and that makes sense. Whether you want to be a leader or you're a reluctant leader, if you can inspire others, it is part of this. It is part of this. It's part of being focused. It's the use of the energy. I wish I could find it, but I recognize that because great leaders have a magnetism about them, and it doesn't mean that every woman's going to fall over trying to get to this man. That's not it. It is a charisma that we're all familiar with. We've all walked into rooms and just, you are obviously the one that I need to be around, or everybody's flocking around somebody, or everybody's attracted or drawn to, of course, that magnetism, drawn to somebody. And that's the use of that energy that's unconscious, right? I mean, it's obvious it's unconscious in terms of wanting to use it to attract particular people. Instead, it is simply an energy that is there, and that's where that blessing comes in, to that we have that energy and we're focusing its attention on something else. It's become more because we now have brought in that other energy of love, and we have that much more enthusiasm and magnetism that is attractive to others, which make us better leaders. I don't know where that came from. Just thought I'd share that.
Yeah, really good stuff. Really good.
Excellent. So what are you doing home, Ron? Taking a day?
Well, yeah,
Okay.
I've got a doctor's appointment today, so I traveled back home. I commute back and forth,
okay.
So from Houston to the Fort Worth area, and so I traveled back home last night, going to the doctor today. So
okay,
I'm just
wish you well on the doc appointment. Hope all goes well there. Anybody else want to join Ron and I?
Yeah, I'm going to go.
Oh, you don't have to go, dear. Up to you. But anybody else is welcome to join us in the room to talk about enthusiasm, desire to change, focus of attention, focus of energy. We can put it on a plane that's easier to discuss, or maybe because I'll tell you now, I'm glad we didn't get into the discussion of the way the world is today. And we can see played out in front of us the conspiracy, if you will, to encourage our young people and us to be less than what we can be. Because I still think it comes down to each individual. We are capable of change. I know that in myself. I've proven it in myself. I've seen it in other people. And if we have the desire to change, and if that desire is strong enough, it can be done. I also happen to be a believer in miracles, but going one step further as well, the desire to change, to seek out others that we want to be like and ask, how did you do that? How did you get there? And then be willing to put in the work that they put in. Hello, David. Good to see you with us. I believe that's possible. I believe Napoleon Hill is showing us that it's possible. And it's based on those energies that we have within us. And I truly, I'm going to go back one more time to the love, romance, and sex. That combination is unbeatable when it's there. There's a lot of power to have somebody behind me. And I know my husband feels that way. There's a lot of power. He's able to draw on something, and I believe it's what we have together. He's able to draw on something to get through and to achieve things and to be better. Okay, so we are approaching the top of the hour. Anybody wants to jump in and share? Pretty quiet in the comment section, although it's good supportive things. Thank you. I know it's tough to talk about, especially when the whole focus is on men, right? And that is, the whole focus is on men. I have a question from the audience. How would that apply to asexual people? I have no idea. Oh, thanks, Stan. So glad you were here. I have to get going to my private community stuff. Thanks for the show and motivation. Thank you. I'm glad you were here. I'll be here tomorrow, Monday morning, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. Eastern time. So honestly, I have no idea how that applies to anybody except my own experience and what I've seen with women and what I've seen with men. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and shut down the recording. This is Charlene Burke with Grow Because You Know. That's www.growbecauseyouknow.com. Thank you, Matt and Ron, for joining me in the live stream today. Thank you for those in the comment section for listening, and for those who contributed to the conversation and the discussion. I thank you. And you who are watching the replay, come join us on the live stream when you're able. Today's been a good discussion. Morning Mindset Cafe, weekday mornings, 8 a.m. Eastern time here on Blab. So signing off now and encouraging all of us to move forward with the day on purpose, with purpose, to grow our hearts, grow our minds, and grow our businesses.